Welcome back to the Whole Bible series. This week we are studying the book of Joshua. So Joshua, or Yehoshua, is part of the former prophets in the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. In our Bible, it is part of the Old Testament historical books. Joshua is a history or a chronicle of Joshua's life after the death of Moses. And so it tells about the entrance of the Israelites into the Promised Land and their attempted conquering of the nations of Canaan. Just a quote here from Survey of the Old Testament that says, early in the 20th century, it was not unusual to see references to the Hexateuch, a group that contains 6 books, the Pentateuch plus the book of Joshua. Though some still maintain this approach, it is much more common today to find Joshua included in the work referred to as the Deuteronomic history. For questions on the Old Testament historical books or the Deuteronomic history, please go back to episode 10 where we covered that, and we'll explain that a little bit in more detail. Joshua is the 6th book of the Bible. Who wrote Joshua and when? According to the Hebrew Talmudic tradition, which I'll cover in just a second, they hold that Joshua was written by Joshua after Moses had died and then throughout the conquering of the Promised Land to the end of Joshua's life. The Talmud is a book or multiple books that are actually like rabbinic commentaries on the Old Testament or on the Tanakh. So these rabbis kind of explain what's going on in the Old Testament and help the Jews to understand what they should understand. So this is very important to them because the rabbis dictate how the Jews should believe what is written in the Bible. And so these Talmuds, and there's multiple of them, help the Jews to understand the Old Testament or the Tanakh. So there's a quote here from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible that says, Talmud is a word meaning to study or to learn. It is a body of literature in Hebrew and Aramaic covering interpretations of legal portions of the Old Testament, progressive establishment of traditional materials, an addition of a body of wise counsel from many rabbinical sources spanning a time period from shortly after Ezra in 400 BC until approximately the 500s AD. Again, for more information on who wrote Joshua and when, please go back to episode 10. Joshua is broken into 4 sections, which we're going to cover today. And just to reiterate where we left off at the end of Deuteronomy, which we went over a couple weeks ago, God had given Moses the boundary of the lands and had called Joshua to succeed him as leader. So here in this map, we see that the portions east of the Jordan River, they have already conquered, and they're dwelling in the plains of Moab. And to the left, all the area in green is the area that's been promised to them, but they haven't taken yet. And so Moses climbs the mountain and dies, and the people are mourning in the plains of Moab. And so Joshua takes over and is ready to lead the Israelites across the Jordan and to take the Promised Land as God has commanded them to do. So let's go ahead and start with the first section in the book of Joshua. Joshua 1:1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, that is to the west, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 spies secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, Go view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and came to the house of the prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told of the king of Jericho, Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, and for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. And the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the man, I know that the Lord, Yahweh, has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. So we see here again that the emphasis is on what God has done, what Yahweh has done. Verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my mother, or my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, Our life for your life, even to death. If you do not tell of this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, Go into the hills, or your pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until their pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go on your way. The men said to her, We will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours, that you made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to the oath that you have made us swear. And she said, According to your words, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They came down from the hills. So this is after they went and hid in the hills. They came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened. And they said to Joshua, Truly the Lord has given all the lands into our hand, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. So this is a far cry from the last time when Moses sent out spies, of which Joshua and Caleb were amongst them. They came back, and the majority of them were scared because of the giants in the land. They were afraid because of the numerous people and the size of the people. But here, the spies come back, and they tell a different story. They tell Joshua that God has given this land into our hands. And so they are being strong and courageous. And so they're telling Joshua, God has prepared these people for us to conquer. So the Israelite army marches towards Gilgal with the ark out in front, and they cross the Jordan River as God commands them to do. And so the ark goes in front of them, and the priests carrying the ark step into the river, and the river stops flowing. So just very similar to what happened with the Red Sea, the river stops and allows them all passage through the river on dry land. And so they set up a memorial of stones on the other side to remind all of their future heirs of what God has done for them here. Chapter 5, verse 1. As soon as all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. So again, God is at work. Yahweh is preparing the hearts of their enemies to be conquered. They come across the Jordan and they celebrate a first Passover in the land of Canaan, in the promised land. Then we get to verse 10. While the people of Israel were encamped at Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. And the manna ceased the day after they ate of the produce of the land. And there was no longer any manna for the people of Israel, but they ate of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So God had promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. And now that they get to receive God's promise to eat of the land, then God's sustenance, the manna, the miracle sustenance goes away. Coming into the second portion of Joshua, the conquest narratives. Continuing chapter 5, verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him, and he said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. So I want to camp out here for just a minute. There's a lot of things going on in this short little passage. So let's first start with something that we've seen already. So we've seen a man standing before with a drawn sword in his hand. So let's look back at that into the account in Numbers chapter 22. Over here in the box on the left, it says, then this is the whole passage with Balak and Balaam, where he's supposed to curse Israel. And so Balaam rides his donkey to go see Balak because he's been called to curse Israel. And as he does this, the donkey sees the angel of the Lord. And then later on here in verse 31, Balaam sees him as well. So let's read what it says. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in his way with a drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed down and fell on his face. So this is what I want you to see here. You see the colors kind of lining up. So we see the angel of the Lord, which correlates here with the commander of the army of the Lord. Okay, so we already know, we've gone over multiple times who the angel of the Lord is. If you missed that, go all the way back to our Genesis series and start from there. But we know who the angel of the Lord is. It's the physical Yahweh. It is the physical version of Yahweh, and which we can rightly interpret to be the same character that arrives in the New Testament as Jesus Christ. All right, so we see the angel of the Lord, or the commander of the Lord's army, here. So it's the same person, it's the same entity, the same supernatural person that's here, a physical person, but of supernatural origin. There's a note here at the bottom. It says that I actually went back to the Hebrew for this. So commander is interpreted from the Hebrew word sar, but Hebrew word sar also means prince. And in the Old Testament, both the Messiah and in angelic beings in the Old Testament are referred to as prince. And so this saying here, I am the commander of the army of the Lord, could also be interpreted as I am prince who goes to war for Yahweh. All right. So the very clear idea here is, number one, this is a supernatural being in a physical form. But number two, it correlates exactly over to the same person as the angel of the Lord. The other thing I want you to see is a man standing with a drawn sword in his hand. So not only is he standing in both passages, but he has a drawn sword in his hand. He is ready for battle. All right. God has promised the Israelites to lead them into the promised land. And now here's the man who's going to lead the attack, the man who's going to bring God's will on the Canaanites. And then lastly, I want you to see in green here that in both these passages, both Joshua and Balaam immediately fall on their face and worship. Okay, this is not something you do for your regular run-of-the-mill angel that you run into. You don't see that in the Old Testament. You don't see people worshiping angels. And in a few passages where they try to, they are told not to, because they are not in the presence of the Lord or of Yahweh. But here it's clear that both the angel of the Lord and the commander of the army of the Lord, so the prince, who is the angel of the Lord, allows this to happen. He allows himself to be worshiped. All right. So again, reinforcing the idea that we are seeing the physical Yahweh figure here. And we come into the actual conquest narratives themselves. Chapter 6. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. Let's stop there real quick. There's a picture here on the left, shows a model of what ancient Jericho likely looked like. And so you see that there is a very large wall surrounding the entire city. It's a fortified city. It's not a little village that's easy for an army to take. This is a fortified city that typically you would have to lay siege to because you couldn't get through these walls. And so you'd have to starve the people out. But God has something else here in mind. So let's look at verse 2. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. This you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with a ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, and all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So God has a plan. He has told Joshua to do something very specific for 7 days. For the first 6 days, they're just going to march around the city once. And on the 7th day, they're actually going to march around the entire city wall 7 times and then blow their trumpets and shout. And guess what? Once again, God will bring victory. It's not the power of the Israelite army. It's the power of God that does this. So Israel does what God says, and we get to verse 15. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that it is in it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. I want you to note that. Everything in the city is supposed to be destroyed. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who were with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. Down to verse 22. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside of the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to spy out, or had sent out to spy out Jericho. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So one thing I want you to see here, I don't typically want us to reach into the New Testament yet. I want us to kind of build up on the Old Testament understanding before we get to the New Testament. But I want you to see that Rahab is in this story for a reason, right? God could have had Joshua really easily just tell this story by saying, hey, we conquered Jericho, and that was our first big victory. But he doesn't. Number one, Joshua's glorifying God because it's God's victory. But number two, we come to the story of Rahab. And when we read the Bible like a novel, we actually see these characters that there's a lot of people that we come across in the Bible, but there's characters like this, like Rahab, that just stand out. There has to be a reason why she's in here. Well, in this case, there is. And so we see two quotes down here. Number one, Hebrews 11:31 says, by faith Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Okay, so it's showing here that God saved Rahab because of her faith. She believed in who Yahweh was and how powerful he was, that he was the one and only all-powerful God. And so by faith, God saved her. And then we see in Matthew 1, a little note here that it says, and Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. So Rahab actually plays into a very important genealogy, and comes into contact with a figure we're going to see in a couple weeks named Boaz. And so whenever we see somebody that stands out in the story, whether it's the Bible or a novel or a movie, we have to pay attention, because we know that they're there for a purpose. And here Rahab is here for a purpose. And God is making very clear that she did something righteous in his eyes, that she went beyond what she was expected to do. And because of her respect and belief in Yahweh, that she took care of God's people. And it was God's victory here in Jericho. So then continuing on, the conquest then continues. We find out that Achan of Judah, that he sins by actually taking treasures from Jericho. Everything was supposed to be destroyed, and only the gold and silver and the metals were supposed to go into the Lord's treasury. But in fact, Achan takes something and hides it in his tent. And so because of that, God judges Israel. And when they go and attack the city of Ai, they lose badly. Like it shouldn't have been a battle at all, but God gives them over to these people of Ai because of the sin of Achan. And so God reveals that sin to Joshua, and the Israelites purge the sin. Again, they have to keep a pure community. And so Achan and his family are purged from that community to maintain the purity near Yahweh. And so then after that, God gives the city of Ai over to the Israelites, and they continue into the land and their conquest. Let's look at chapter 8 down to verse 30. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal. Now remember this from the book of Deuteronomy. They were told to build or to go to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And so this is where they're following through on that promise that they had made, or I should say that they were told to do, they were instructed to do by Moses through the Lord. Verse 31, so they're on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered it on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And there, in the presence of the Lord of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy, in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. So Joshua is copying the law on two stones. 33, and all Israel, sojourner as well as native born, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded them at the first, to bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women, and the little ones, and the sojourners who lived among them. Chapter 9. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. So these other kings find out what has happened to Jericho and how God has not only parted the Red Sea and the Jordan Sea, but he's giving over nations to Israel, and they become scared. And so they are now trying to band together to fight against Israel. And then we get this little story about the Gibeonites, who are actually a tribe of the Hivites. So the tribe of Gibeon, they come and they deceive Israel. So they pretend to be foreigners and to give Israelites provisions in return for a covenant of peace. And so Israel gets tricked into making this agreement. Look here at verse 14. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. Well, that seems to be a problem. 15, and Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them and let them live as the leaders of the congregation swore. So we see over here in the box on the left, a quote from Deuteronomy 20, 16 through 18, which we covered a couple weeks ago. And just want to reiterate this. Let's look at verse 16. But in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to the abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. So as a provision in protecting the Israelites, they're supposed to wipe out these people so that they can't be tempted to worship the other gods or to be distracted by these people. And yet, because they're gullible, they are tricked by the Hivites, by the Gibeonites from the Hivites, into making a peace accord with them. Let's go down to verse 16. At the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. But the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. So going back, they did not get counsel from the Lord. And so they made their own decision and they were tricked. And because they didn't go to the Lord with this question about whether they should allow these people to live or not, they're stuck in a catch-22 now. So they've swore to them by the God of Israel that they let them live. But on the other side, God has told them to devote them for complete destruction. So now they're in this catch-22 where they can't win either way they go. We then have 5 Amorite kings who join forces to attack Gibeon because they've heard of their alliance with Israel. So these 5 kings decide that they're going to put Gibeon to destruction. But Israel comes to their aid, and God gives them victory over these 5 kings. Let's look at chapter 10, verse 10. And the Lord threw them into a panic. So again, this is what Yahweh is doing. The Lord threw them into a panic. These are these 5 kings and their armies before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. So again, the Lord is going before them, and he's doing most of the heavy lifting here. All right, so continuing this battle, God also stops the sun at Joshua's request until the battle is over. The sun actually stops in the middle of the sky until the battle is over. So again, this is what God is doing. Later on, God gives over much of the rest of the promised land to the Israelite armies, but there's still some portions left to conquer. So we see here on the map on the left here, all these green areas are the areas that they have conquered. So this is now under Israelite control, but there's still some areas of the promised land that have not been conquered. And again, we remember going back to the last couple of books that God had told Moses that he was going to give them the land over to them slowly, a little bit at a time. And so we're at this portion where they've conquered a majority of the land, but they still have some work to do. And then we're coming to the third section, the description of the allotment land. Chapter 13. Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years, and there remains yet very much land to possess." There's a little note here at the bottom that I put. This is approximately after 5 years of battle. So they've gone over, the 2.5 tribes from the east have joined them, and they've battled for 5 years to conquer as much land on the west side of the Jordan as they have. So it's been about 5 years to this point where Joshua is now going to rest. Verse 2. This is the land that yet remains, all the regions of the Philistines and all of the land of the Geshurites, from the Shihor, which is east of Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron. It is counted as Canaanite. There are 5 rulers of the Philistines, those of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, and those of the Avim in the south, all the land of the Canaanites, and Mira that belongs to the Sidonians, to Aphek, to the boundary of the Amorites, and the land of the Gebalites, and all Lebanon, toward the sunrise, from Baal Gad, beyond Mount Hermon, to Lebo Hamath, all the inhabitants of the hill country, from Lebanon to Misrephoth Maim, even all the Sidonians. I myself will drive them out from before the people of Israel. Again, God is doing the work. Only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now, therefore, divide this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and half the tribe of Manasseh. So God is telling Joshua here, it's time for you to slow down. You can retire. You've done what I've asked you to do. And these other areas that are remaining to be conquered, I will give those over to the faithful Israel tribes as long as they continue to do what I have told them to do. And so he now tells Joshua to give the inheritance of the promised land to the 9.5 tribes. Again, we already have 2.5 tribes that have taken land on the east side of the Jordan. So the other 9.5 tribes now need to be given their inheritance. So Joshua then distributes the land by lot to each of the 9.5 tribes along with the high priest. Just a little note here. I'm reminding you of something that we went through back in Genesis, back in episode 3. If you are actually episode 4, I believe, if you want to go back and look at it. Let me take a look. Actually, episode 5. Go watch all of them, but episode 5 is where we come across this. So Genesis 49, 5 through 7, this is where Israel is giving the blessing for his sons. And we get to Simeon and Levi, who are brother. It says, verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So again, just going back to highlight, Reuben loses his birthright because of something that he did, because he took advantage of one of his father's concubines. And then Simeon and Levi, who are next in line, go and kill a whole town full of people when their sister is raped. And so the birthright then falls down to Judah, who is the fourth son. And so here in the blessing, Israel again says that Jacob that Simeon and Levi are not going to receive their inheritance in the land. So that's just a reminder as we come into this. So here on the left, we see where we started. They had already conquered the east portion of the Jordan River, and they were to conquer the west. And then on the right, we see the actual allotments of the tribes. And we'll go through this here in just a second. So there's a total of 12 portions of land that are given out, but to only 10 sons, because we have the 2 sons, Levi and Simeon, who do not get a portion of land. They lost that version or that portion of their inheritance because of their actions. And so Reuben and Judah and Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, and Benjamin all receive a portion of land as their inheritance. And Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, receive 3 portions. So we have the East Manasseh and West Manasseh and Ephraim. Those are the 3 portions given to the descendants of Joseph. So again, Levi, we've already covered this as we've gone through the last few books. Levi gets no land inheritance. Instead, he gets Yahweh as his inheritance. And so they're only going to be given cities and pasture lands within the greater land in which to dwell. Simeon does get cities, but they are part of Judah's land. So if you see here on the map, Simeon's kind of here in the middle of Judah. And this land is not theirs. They only get portion these cities within the land of Judah. So that's why they're surrounded by Judah, because they're actually living in Judah in these cities that have been given over to them as their inheritance. So Judah's portion, as you see, is the whole southern part of Israel. They get the double portion because, like I said, the birthright falls to Judah. And so Judah gets his double portion. And then Caleb and his descendants are actually allotted the city of Hebron within Judah. God had promised to honor Caleb and Joshua because they were the good spies that came back and believed in Yahweh. And so Caleb, for being faithful to Yahweh and trusting him, but also for being a great warrior, Caleb gets an entire city to himself and to his descendants. Let's look at chapter 15, verse 63. It's talking after the Judah's portion is given. But the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah could not drive out. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. Again, going back before, they were supposed to hand over to destruction all the people of the land and to drive them out if they couldn't destroy them. But here, Judah can't drive them out. And it doesn't give us a reason for that. But obviously, they continue to let these Jebusites live with them in Jerusalem. And so that foreshadows to us, just like before, that there's some issues here, and they're not following what Yahweh has called them to do. And so we may have an issue here in the future. Same thing here with Joseph's portions, with Manasseh and Ephraim, chapter 16, verse 10. However, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have been made to do forced labor. Again, not what God commanded them to do. Chapter 17, verse 12. Yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of the cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in the land. Now, when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. So here, again, they're straying for what God had told them to do. The people of Manasseh, it says here that they grew strong. And so eventually they could have put these people to death, or they could have driven them out or eliminated them, but they chose not to. We then have the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, which gets set up in Shiloh. I've circled it here on the map on the left. So this is in the area of Ephraim, and will actually become important throughout the rest of the, or actually most of the rest of the Old Testament. Shiloh is where the tabernacle is set up, and so this is where they are going to worship Yahweh. The rest of the tribes then receive their lots by land, and Joshua receives for himself and his descendants a city within Ephraim. We then get the cities of refuge established. There's 3 on the east side of the Jordan and 3 on the west side of the Jordan. Again, this is where someone can go for refuge if they accidentally kill somebody. If it is an accident, they can run to these cities of refuge to make sure that they're not killed in revenge, or in someone avenging what they have done, until they've had a rightful trial. And then we get the Levites receiving their cities and pasture lands within each tribe's land. So the Levites are spread out throughout everybody. Again, they don't get land for themselves, but they get cities within the other tribe's land. Then we come to chapter 21, verse 43. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he has sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. And finally, to the 4th section of Joshua. Chapter 22. At that time, Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but you have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as he promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave to you on the other side of the Jordan. Only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in his ways, and to keep the commandments, and to cling to him, and to serve with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. So again, the fighting men from the 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan had joined their brothers to help their brothers win the land of Canaan west of the Jordan, and they've been out there fighting with them for approximately 5 years. And so now God is going to give them rest and allow them to go back to their land and to their families. And as they go back, they cross the Jordan, and they decide to build a tribe, or excuse me, they decide to build an altar as a memorial next to the Jordan River. And there is some misunderstanding here, and the tribes on the west side of the Jordan take this as a disobedience of Yahweh. Yahweh has said that he's to be worshipped in the tabernacle and not at any altar, just as the other people do in the land. And so the Western tribes get upset because they think that the Eastern tribes are trying to worship Yahweh from this altar that they've built. And it's clarified by the Eastern tribes that they've only done this as a memorial so that the people that cross the Jordan in this place will recognize what Yahweh has done and remember, rather than worshiping Yahweh at this point. We get to chapter 23, where Joshua makes his final address to the people. A long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and heads, its judges and officers, and said to them, I am now old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It is the Lord your God who has fought for you. The Lord your God will push them back before you and drive them out of your sight, and you shall possess the land just as the Lord God promised you. So again, there's more work to do. And then he reiterates the promise. Therefore, be very strong and keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mentions of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them, but you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done this day. Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you and make marriages with them so that you associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a whip for your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish off this good ground that the Lord God has given you. But just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you has been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off this good land that the Lord your God has given you, if you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down before them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off the good land that he has given you. So we have the covenant promise and the warning, the curse. And then Joshua goes on to renew the covenant between Yahweh and Israel. Chapter 24, verse 14. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. We will serve the Lord. Then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Therefore we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God. But Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. And the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. He said, then put away your foreign god, or the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, the Lord our God, Yahweh, we will serve, and his voice we will obey. So Joshua sent the people away, every man to his inheritance. Then Joshua dies at 110 years old. Verse 31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and who had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. As for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem in the piece of land that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. So here in the box is just referencing this. We had talked about this both in Genesis and Exodus, that Joseph had died in Egypt, but he made them swear to carry their bones out of there when God brought them out of Egypt. And then in Exodus, where Moses actually gathers the bones of Joseph and takes them with him. So now the bones of Joseph are finally put at rest with his fathers. And so we come to the end of Joshua. The Israelites are now settled in the land. Joshua has completed what God has told him to do. And they've been given the promised land as God had told Abraham in the original covenant. And so God has them in the land. He's going to bless them as long as they continue to abide by that covenant and to follow him. But we have to remember that the tribes have still not completely driven out the Canaanites. Remember the map we saw earlier, those green areas they now control, but they have some more work to do, especially in the area of the Philistines. They need to drive these people out from the land. And so they have to focus on what Yahweh has told them to do, and they need to turn over their hearts and minds to Yahweh and destroy all the other people and the gods of the land that they're conquering. And so as we leave Joshua, that's where we're at. Joshua's called the people to look to Yahweh as they continue to dwell in this new promised land. And if they follow him with their whole hearts, then they will continue to take the land until they receive the entire promised land from God. All right. So if you have any questions, let me know. Write them down below. Next week, we will continue the story into the book of Judges. But thanks for joining us today, and have a great day.